What's up, Joe? What's up, everybody? The NHL Divisional Finals are in full swing, and our man Ryan Lake joins us to discuss what's happened thus far and how he sees each series playing out. It's springtime, but we're taking to the ice with Ryan Lake on Sports 360. Well, I'm joined today on Sports 360 by Ryan Lake. Ryan is founder of Beyond the Playbook, and he is our hockey expert. And he joins us today to talk about the second round of the 2019 NHL playoffs. Ryan, how are you today?
Doing great, and thanks. Really thrilled to be back and talk about the exciting NHL playoffs that are going on.
Yeah, I'm glad to have you back. Really appreciate our chat. I, appreciate all the knowledge you bring concerning the game, the players, and all of that. And I want to jump right in because the NHL playoffs have been interesting so far. We've had our share of upsets, and want to get your take on all of that as we look at the four series that are currently going on right now in the division finals. And I'd like to start out in the East. I mean, we have Carolina and the Islanders, and also Columbus Blue Jackets and the Boston Bruins. But let's start first with Carolina and the New York Islanders, because there, Carolina has a 2-0 series lead as they head back to Carolina. And I would imagine for some, that might be a surprise. But why don't we start with that series? Tell us how you see that one so far.
Yeah, this has been a really closely fought, really competitive series so far. There's been lead changes in overtime. Carolina's gotten the better end of it, which some people might think is surprising because they're, a wild card seed. But they really, had to fight their way to get into the playoffs, and then they went 7 games in the last series against the Capitals, who won the Stanley Cup last year. And Game 7 went to double overtime. So they've really fought for everything they've gotten. And I think that's really elevated their level of play, which is kind of taken the Islanders by surprise a little bit. The Islanders swept Pittsburgh in the first round, which really not too many people saw coming. But then they were resting for about a week and a half, waiting for Carolina to finish off the Caps. And so they kind of were a little rusty and haven't really found their legs quite yet. But they find themselves in a really difficult position going back to Carolina down 2-0. It's been really exciting. And one thing that, last night when Peter Mrazek went down with an injury in the second period, I think everybody kind of thought the Islanders would wrap up this game and tied the series 1-1, which would have been great for the Islanders and put them in a really strong position going back to Carolina. But Curtis McElhinney came in and was stellar, and I don't believe he allowed a goal in his performance. And, Carolina was able to come back and beat the Islanders in the third period.
Yeah. Yeah. And, the point you make about the Islanders, making short order of the Penguins and, having the opportunity to rest, which on the one hand is good, but on the other hand, you're talking about inactivity, at least in terms of gameplay. And meanwhile, Carolina goes through 7 tough games, including the double overtime, as you said, in the final game. And, they're on top of their game. They're sharp. And, the Islanders coming out of a bit rusty. And you mentioned that Carolina, as a wild card. And one of the interesting things here, Ryan, and we spoke about this a minute ago offline, is all 4 wild cards have advanced, which is, I would imagine something that probably hasn't happened too many times before. And so we have Carolina as one of the wild cards, and they're sitting with a 2-0 series lead as they head home. And then we have perhaps, the wild card that had the biggest storyline in the first round, and that is the Columbus Blue Jackets, because they swept Tampa Bay and are now knotted up at 1-1 with the Boston Bruins in their division series. So why don't you talk about that one and maybe give us your thoughts a little bit about how Columbus even got here with the sweep over Tampa Bay?
Yeah, I think this is probably one of the most exciting second round series that we have. Columbus, really struggled during the regular season to find their identity and come together as a team. They made 4 big trades at the deadline, bringing in Matthew Shane and Ryan Dzingel, and a couple other guys. And, the chemistry wasn't really quite there. They played good enough to kind of stumble their way into the last spot in the East for the playoffs. And going into the Tampa series, everyone assumed Tampa would take care of them in 4 or 5 games. It would be a pretty easy series for Tampa. But, they really shocked the hockey world and shocked Tampa. They swept them, really dominated every single game against Tampa. Matthew Shane, who's an unrestricted free agent after this season, is currently leading all unrestricted free agents in the playoffs, which is something that's really surprising looking at his past record. He hadn't scored a goal in the playoffs up until this year. And so, he's really finding his game. He's really gelling really well with Panarin and Atkinson. And so the Blue Jackets they're probably the hottest team in the league and operating at a really high level. By sweeping Tampa Bay, they also had about a week and a half off of pretty much doing nothing. I think they took about a week off of practice. And so when they met in the first game against Boston, they kind of ran into a buzzsaw a little bit. Boston had just finished up 7 games with the Toronto Maple Leafs. Really contested, competitive series, hard-hitting, high pace. In Boston, they kept their intensity up. They won that first game of the second round against Columbus. But unlike the Islanders, Columbus was really able to fight back in the second game and tie up the series, really stealing back home ice advantage as they go back to Columbus for the next 2 games. And, I think the Blue Jackets are a team that are still being discounted and kind of overlooked, but, I think they might be the most dangerous team in the East right now. Them and Carolina are the 2 I see going to the conference finals. And, I think it's going to be a really contested series with Boston. But in the end, I think the Blue Jackets they have the belief and they're just playing at such a high level that I think they'll be able to overcome the hard-hitting, dominant, and physically dominant Boston.
Mm. So what I find interesting there, Ryan, is that you kind of slipped in a couple of predictions there. I know that the prediction game is not your preference, but you kind of let it out that you think Columbus will take that one and Carolina will take care of the Islanders. I was going to come back toward the end and see if you wanted to, look into your crystal ball and let us know how the series would turn out. But you surprised me. So, okay. So if that's the case, I can rub my hands together here and look forward to 2 more predictions as we go out west. But duly noted, you believe Carolina and Columbus will advance to the conference finals in the East. Now out west, we have the Dallas Stars and the St. Louis Blues, and also the Avalanche and the San Jose Sharks. But let's start with Dallas and St. Louis. That series also is tied up at 1. How do you see that one so far, and how do you see that one playing out?
This is the Stars in the regular season weren't necessarily known as a highly defensive style team, but in the playoffs, they, have really, really found their defensive game, and they had a really defensive style game series against Nashville. They ended up beating Nashville in 6 games. St. Louis just got done with a really high offense, fast-paced series against Winnipeg, where they beat Winnipeg in 6 games. And so both teams had about a similar amount of rest between series. The styles are pretty different. The Stars can, with Sagan and Ben and Radulov, they can score at will. But when they play this defensive style game, they're really, really difficult to beat. I think the Blues are trying to figure out how they can get through that neutral zone and keep their speed up to really play the style they want to play. And they're having a bit of a challenge with it so far. The Blues came out on home ice, won the first game, but the Stars really played their game and were dominant in the second game. And now the series is going back to Dallas, where they have a really strong home ice advantage. Even though St. Louis has Jordan Binnington playing unreal, especially for a rookie in goaltender, I think this series is probably going to go Dallas's way. And I think it's really because, they play that defensive style, but then they have these superstars that can score when they get the opportunity. And, I think as the Stars, again, are a wild card team. And I think, I'm kind of jumping on these wild card bandwagons, I guess. I think the Stars are going to pull this one out probably in 7 games, but I do think the Stars get past the Blues.
Wow. And again, and I had mentioned earlier, Ryan, that, with the 4 wild cards, advancing to the division finals. Has that ever happened before, as far as you know?
Well, this format with the wild card is relatively new in the last 5 or so years. But prior to the introduction of the wild card, we had 8 seeds. So the LA Kings, I believe in 2010, around 2010, they were an 8 seed and they went all the way and they won the Stanley Cup. So that's similar to say if the Avalanche win the Cup this year. Things of that nature have happened. We've never had all 4 of the lowest seeds get this far and then play this well. Okay. So it makes for a very, very exciting tournament. It also breaks everyone's brackets.
Sure, of course it does. All right, so you are going with a 3rd wild card with Dallas over St. Louis. Now, I heard you kind of sneak in there when you were talking about the Kings, winning as an 8th seed. You said that would be like Colorado winning this year, and the fact that you're from Denver and you're talking about Colorado winning, I'm sure is just a coincidence. It's not that you're rooting for them or anything, right? It's just that just happened to be coincidental. But let's go to that series, Colorado and San Jose. Obviously, a lot to talk about there, not just with that series, but also with the prior series between San Jose and Vegas and how that ended. Why don't we start there? What are your thoughts on how the Golden Knights got ousted in their final game against San Jose? What are your thoughts about that?
As someone that is a fan, but also really studies the game and the business side of the game, I found it really frustrating in Game 7 between Vegas and the Sharks. And it was a culmination of really a trend we've seen all playoffs of inconsistent and bad refereeing. It was Vegas was up 3-0 with 10 minutes left in the third. And then there was a controversial hit. Unfortunately, Joe Pavelski ended up with, a pretty serious injury and was bleeding from his head. But if you look at the actual play, there was maybe a minor penalty, but the referees, they clearly didn't see it. They didn't make the call until, after Pavelski was taken off the ice and the Sharks were pleading their case for a call. And then they ultimately went to the extreme, and they ended up kicking out a player for Vegas and then giving the Sharks a 5-minute power play, which allowed the Sharks, really to get back in the game. They scored 4 goals in those 5 minutes. You can't blame really anybody but Vegas for letting up those 4 goals, but it just created this buzzsaw that Vegas was entering into, that they really couldn't compete with the intensity being in San Jose for that game, and the captain of the Sharks just going down with an injury, and then the Sharks having this 5-minute power play. And then Vegas was able to tie it up. It goes to overtime, and ultimately the Sharks win in the overtime, knocking off Vegas. But it was just a really it's difficult to see games decided by referees when the call is borderline or incorrect. And then 2 days afterwards, the NHL came out and apologized to Vegas, saying it was the wrong call. They made a mistake. I think that in some ways makes it worse. From the fan side, it's difficult to watch that and not really know how games are going to be called. And then from the business side, and really looking at it from that perspective, it's hard to see the Vegas players go out on a bad call. And every player that plays in the playoffs is awarded a certain amount of money by the NHL for how far they go into the playoffs. And so those players were really robbed, one, of the opportunity of playing and trying to win the Stanley Cup, but also that additional money that they would have earned. It's a hard situation and something I never like to see. I like to see, the players decide the game and the referees, call a penalty that's obviously a penalty and give it the appropriate punishment.
Right. Yeah. And you alluded to this as well, though, that what in fairness as well to the referees, it was Vegas that gave up the 4 goals in 5 minutes. You know what I mean? Yeah, bad call was made, but there's still hockey to be played. And, credit San Jose or blame Vegas for what happened in those 5 minutes in terms of the 4 goals being scored by San Jose. But I get your point. I mean, certainly, the bad call opened the door to that, you would think. But at the same time, Vegas has a 3-goal lead and let it slip through their hands. The only thing I would say too on this is, the apology by the league 2 days later. I agree with you. I think that makes matters worse. We see it in all the sports now. The last 2 minutes of the NFL, the last 2 minutes of the NBA, and they give, the league will give their take on calls that took place in the last 2 minutes, and I get it. They want transparency and accountability, I guess, but sometimes I think those things make matters worse, and I think that's certainly what happened here. But be that as it may, we now have the Avalanche and the Sharks, and this series is also tied up at 1. And again, how do you see it so far, and who do you think will prevail in this series?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is, probably the best matchup in the West. The Avalanche, they're the second wild card seed in the West, essentially the 8th in the last seed. They got in into the playoffs with, the second to last game of the regular season. So they really, really waited to the last moment to get in. They ended up playing Calgary in the first round, which was the first seed in the West, and they beat Calgary in 5 games. It's a pretty similar story to the Columbus Blue Jackets beating Tampa Bay. Calgary was the second best team in the entire league. Nathan MacKinnon was, the superstar for the Avalanche, was really unstoppable against Calgary. San Jose has found a way to slow him down. He hasn't been quite the threat in these first 2 games. The second game, he found a way to create some other opportunities from the other players, but he hasn't been able to dominate the way he did against Calgary. The Avalanche also brought in, a 20-year-old defenseman, Cal McCarr, who just won the Hobey Baker for college hockey, which is essentially the Heisman Trophy for college hockey. And his UMass Minutemen lost in the national championship game. And then the day after that, he signed his deal with the Avalanche, played a couple of games in the Calgary series. And, he's been really noticeable, playing really well in the San Jose series so far. And they paired him up with Sam Girard, who's also 20 years old, last night. And those two players, probably the youngest in the series, both playing defense on the same line. It was exciting. It was, if you're an Avs fan, it was probably a little terrifying at times having two young guys back there. But they can skate really well, and the Sharks really had a hard time with their speed and their creativity. And then the Sharks, coming off that win, the overtime win in Game 7 against Vegas, they've really rallied around Joe Pavelski and his injury and have this rallying cry. They also have Joe Thornton, who's 39 years old. He's never won a cup, future Hall of Famer. So they have a lot of these emotional rally cries, and they're playing really well. The first game against the Avalanche, they controlled play and really dominated. And then the second game, Colorado was really able to find, a way to find their opportunities, capitalize on them, and play some better defense. I think this is probably going to go 7 games. For me, it's the hardest one to call who's going to win. I would love to see my Avalanche go on, but I think the Sharks are probably a better team and would probably close the Avs out in 7.
Wow, I did not expect that one, Ryan. You threw me a curveball. I know we're talking hockey, but you threw me a curveball on that one. So you think San Jose in a tough 7-gamer will come out on top there. So just to recap, you have the Hurricanes over the Islanders, the Blue Jackets over the Bruins, the Stars over the Blues, and the Sharks over the Avalanche. But of course, the games have to be played, and we'll see, how things transpire as we go forward. But it has been exciting so far. I think we're going to continue to see some good hockey, and I appreciate you being able to take some time out of your schedule to take a look at these series and break them down for us. And so, Ryan, thanks for coming on again. And, when we get to the conference finals, I hope to have you back and we can talk about those as well. But in the meantime, enjoy the games and look forward to catching up with you once we reach the conference finals.
Thanks, Jeff. I always love talking hockey with you, and, thrilled that you asked me to be back on. So anytime you want to talk hockey, I'm all about it.
Yeah, and you're being kind. I mean, you're talking hockey, I'm listening. But I appreciate it though, Ryan, and I look forward to having you back once we get through these series and make it to the conference final. So thanks again.
Thanks, Jeff.
Okay. Bye.